All right, time to get gabbed. This has been one of the most asked about topics, I have to say. It has been a fascinating and very interesting time together on Gabversity, where the amount of topics I have received, the amount of comments I've received on both sides with respect to this topic have been fascinating. Hello, welcome back, Miss Bombshell and Gin Tonics. So, we're going to talk about now the data which is consistent with climate change. Now, consistent does not mean it caused climate change or it's proof that climate change is real. That is not my job. My personal bias is, of course, that I'm on the side of climate change. But that in no way, as I said in the first lecture, is any reason to actually agree. That is no reason. That's just my bias. That means absolutely nothing in terms of reality, right? So we're going to talk about data. Now, in the first lecture, my job was to build up the arguments as strong as possible for both sides so that there can be a legitimate what data past or predicted. I'm going to show you data that's been collated by various scientists, and then scientists give conclusions as to what they think that means. But the conclusion is up to you. I'm not here to convince. That is not what Gabversity is about. It's about looking at the data, and then you can decide. What I did last time was build up the arguments for both sides as best as possible, legitimately as best as possible. And that is the minimum that one should be doing, I think, if they're going to engage in dialogue with someone. You have to respect someone's position, and they are in no way less intelligent than you just because they hold a different opinion. In fact, they could be much smarter than you, and in many cases they probably are. So what I've done is I've actually written a letter to my university, and I thought I'll open this lecture by reading what I just read to you guys. It was an open letter to the university on climate change, and if I can freaking get it, I will read it to you. I'm just trying to load it up. I put it on Facebook. If you want to see it, you can go to Facebook.com/Gabsmacked, and you will see Parent Dome. I was just saying you can go to Gabsmacked on Facebook, and you will see the letter that I just wrote to my university. Okay, here is what I wrote. Go away. I wrote as follows, posted by Gabriel, blah, blah, blah. I don't do Facebook. Fair enough. The object of discussions on climate change with those as of yet convinced would be, in my view, to persuade them to see the validity of climate change preparation and prevention. The presentation depicting them, in the last lecture there was a presentation that was pretty damn condescending. The presentation depicting them as intellectually faulty, with each condescending cartoon, serves only to alienate the general population and make our job as supporters of climate change concerns even more difficult. A constructive discussion via, at the very least, acknowledging the best possible arguments from intelligent members of the public who may only be a close distance from supporting climate change concerns can be found on my channel. So I plugged the Gabversity channel, and then I said, where facts don't care about your feelings. So that is my position there. There is nothing better than engaging in dialogue with intelligent people who don't agree with you. How else are you supposed to learn anything? I know I'm going to get hit. They're going to come after me. I'm going to get kicked out of uni. It's a disaster. Anyway, so let's get back to this PowerPoint. We've got ethics, a plant-side view of ethics, and we've got the slide. Okay, here we go. So it is equity definitions, intergenerational equity. Many definitions relating to economics, psychology, sociology. Environmental definition relates to consequences of our actions now on the rights and lives of coming generations. All right. Equates with definitions of sustainability. Okay. So we've got to be careful because as from the last presentation from the uni, it's heavily biased, which is the worst possible thing you can ever do if you want to talk to someone who doesn't agree with you. It's the worst thing in the world. All right. So we can all agree about intergenerational equity. I think that's pretty damn obvious, considering we don't want to leave our kids a society that is worse than what we inherited. We have no right to do that to them. Miss Kasha, hello, my Patreon and GoFundMe supporters. Okay, so equity between people of the same generation can be equity within a nation. I love the irony that comes out here. Proximity to impacts, unequal ability to adapt, lower socioeconomic groups more vulnerable, inequity in power and decision making. I actually think that if there was rising waters for whatever reason, right, I actually think it would help lower socioeconomic classes because they would have to be employed. You were asking for a Ludwig von Mises consideration. Is Keynesian economics? Well, yes, absolutely. And I would say that with rising floods, lower socioeconomic people would have jobs because the rich people live on the coast and their houses will get flooded. All right. Okay, here we go. Climate change mitigation debate. This usually relates to first world versus third world. All right, this part here is where you're going to start seeing some fake left bullshit. Only 5 days of summer until now. All right. What you're going to see here is we're going to see responsibility for climate change, clearly the first world. It says clearly, right? And no evidence has yet been sent, but they've used the word clearly. It's like lottery taxing those who failed maths. Well, it could be both. I was having this discussion with my brother, actually. It was a really good discussion. I can't wait to get him more on the scopes. But my brother, as you would predict, is exactly, saying exactly what you would say. And I said to him, that could easily be true. And it could also be that climate change is real at the same time. And I'm not saying it is. Like I said, I have a bias towards it, but that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that it's actually true. Right? Okay. So what we're saying here is global mitigation efforts seen as unfair to developing countries. Okay. Sea level changes and projections. Okay. So what they've done here is they've given projections. Now, to be fair, they've given a huge margin of error for the projections based upon 3 separate mathematical models. Is bad, it should be what I meant. Yes, that is true. Even for not to be true, governments, corporations must be benevolent. Exactly, and yeah, exactly. Yeah, good luck with that, right? All right. So have a look at this. Right. What they've done is they've shown sea level rises. Okay, up until 2000. Now there have been sea level rises. Now once again, unlike what the uni might suggest, that is not evidence of climate change. That is evidence consistent with climate change. Now I know some people hear me and they think that I'm actually not a supporter of climate change. And just to remind you, I'm a massive supporter of climate change. But you have to be fair and honest about the data they're presenting. And I've said this so many, I will keep saying this. It's a massive caveat you've got to put. So yes, sea levels are rising. Okay, but number one, more boats in the ocean. Well, that could 100% be correct, and they could all be true. It could be 90% the boats, it could be 10% the boats, right? Now, here's the thing, right? We come back to the same, argument. In the 1700s, how were they measured, right? Now, these are arguments that I don't agree with, but they are quite valid, right? And like I said, facts don't care about one's feelings. It is quite valid to say that the ability to measure the sea level at certain points, there are more boats, the data is skewed, the margin of error, For example, right, this graph, have a look at the actual numbers, right? It looks like it's going up, right? But if you look at the number in terms of the ocean rise, right? Yeah, well, we are on a cooling pattern. Well, this is also possible as well. Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the rise has been between 2000 and 1700. It has been 0.3 of a meter. Now, what they haven't put in here is the margin of error. Now, if the margin of error is, for example, 0.2 of a meter, then that means that the sea level may have only risen 0.1, right? So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually have we collected the data? 300 years. How long back? From 1700 until 2010. So 310 years roughly, right? But as I'm saying, these are arguments against my position, but that's the whole point. The point is to understand the arguments against your position to better develop your arguments. It's a tiny amount, that's right. And it depends on the margin of error, right? Now what they've done here is they've made some projections. Okay, so there are three, to be fair, they've put in three mathematical models, right? Now all three, once again, are models. Right? And what we know is that you cannot extrapolate with models. Models are only as good as the assumptions that they use. Right? So that is probably one of the best arguments I've seen against my position. Because, as you guys know, I studied mathematics, and mathematical modeling was one of my strongest subjects. And mathematical modeling is only as good as its assumptions. Right? So have a look at the assumptions here. Okay? What you can see is that there are three different models. This model here, right, gives us a sea of about 0.5 meter, right? The other model, what I call maybe the fake leftist model, is where the sea rises 1.2 meters. All right. So it's very hard to gauge, but they're saying between 0.5 meter and 1.2 meters. All right. That's a projection based upon certain assumptions, which is basically meaningless unless you understand the assumptions. It doesn't mean it's not true. Just be careful what I'm saying. I actually, as I said, my bias is that yes, it will rise. I think it'll be more. I think it'll be 2 meters, right, in the next couple of centuries, right? But thinking it's going to be 2 meters, right, does not mean it will be 2 meters. It might be no meters. It might go down, right? But we're just saying that at the moment the evidence is consistent with anywhere between something that's reasonably stable or up to 1 meter. All right. So what they've done now is they're looking at the US East Coast, right? And they're saying the dangers to Florida if the sea level was to rise 3 meters. Now, the reason I'm not going to show you that is because that's speculation. Speculation is where they say, if it rises 3, you're going to lose this. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't convince anyone of anything. And it's a waste of time. All right. So let's move to precautionary principle. All right. Here is an argument on my side, and there's an argument against it as well. Now, the argument on my side, and this is actually part of the New South Wales Protection of the Environment Act of 1991. So believe it or not, the state of New South Wales, which is the state, half of Australia's population lives in the state of New South Wales, and half of that lives in Sydney, right? This is what they said. If there are threats of serious or irreversible environmental damage, lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reasoning for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. In other words, even if science, according to this act, right? According to this act, even if climate change was not a certainty, we should act as if it is a certainty, right? Now that, I like that argument. But that argument has a flaw. And the flaw in that argument, as much as I hate that, I hate the fact that there's a flaw in it. But there is a flaw in it. And the flaw is that if we were to work that way, then we should work that way on everything, right? We should work that way in case a meteor comes towards the Earth. We should work that way in case ISIS becomes 10 times the size. We should work that way in case we need to move to the moon. Which resource, like how much of our resources do we dedicate to each hypothetical scenario, right? Now, unfortunately, that's actually a good argument against my position. And then I won't go into the subsequent arguments, but so far, in terms of the precautionary principle, that is the argument for and the argument against. Okay. Surely based on each one separately. Well, yes, that's exactly right. So then the second argument that I would come back with would be, well, what is the likelihood of each one? Right? But there's another argument against my position. If I say, what's the likelihood of climate change compared to the likelihood of a meteor hitting the US? Well, the thing is, let's say that the meteor likelihood is 1% and climate change is 10%. All right. But the problem is You can't, because of the gravity of the situation. Even if the meteor has almost no chance of hitting, the problem is if it does hit, we are screwed, right? But with climate change, if it rises 1 meter, we still might be screwed, but not in the same way, right? We still might survive that as humanity, whereas humanity will probably not survive being hit by a meteor in the US, right? The size of, the state of New Mexico, right? The whole world would die. So you can't just say which one is more likely to happen. Okay. So what I'm going to show you guys, this is now data, but can't prevent meteor. Well, we could hypothetically, if we dedicated all of humanity's resources towards annihilating it, like in Armageddon, right? Hypothetically. All right, so now we've gone through that argument. The next thing I want to show you is data. This is actual data. And once again, this data does not prove climate change. It's consistent with climate change, okay? Plus, it could be other things, okay? So it does not eliminate other possibilities. Okay, let's have a look. Right. So here, right, we have the average temperature, okay? And this is over since 1870, right? So roughly since around the Industrial Revolution, right? The average temperature has shifted. Okay, that's different to this. This one here has also been reported in the 20th century, which is the extremities have increased, but the average is also the same. So this is talking about the difference between surface and air temperature. And we talked about this in our last scope. We have, hey, Liran is here. Voice gremlin. We have, hey. We can say, for example, that in terms of the Earth air temperature, the average has remained the same since the 1850s. Yeah, it was, check the last lecture. I think it was 1850s or 1700. I can't remember, but say 1850s, right? Yeah, she is amazing. Right? But the extremities have increased. So this is what's happened with air temperature. The average has not changed, right? But the extremities have changed, okay? So we have a flatter distribution. So that is an argument consistent with some sort of climate change, some sort of rotation of the Earth axis, the increased net carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, all right? So these, once again, I said, are consistent with that. Now, the surface temperature has increased, and this is what's happened to the surface temperature here. So this is the surface temperature. It's actually shifted to the right, okay? Now, that could very well be because of desertification as well, right? Now, what they're saying, right, and this one here is a combination of the two. When you combine, right, when you combine the surface temperature and air temperature, right, you get not only a shift in the average temperature, but you get an increase in the extremities as well. So it's a magnifying effect. So what they're saying is that you get this, okay, which is a magnifying effect of the extreme hot. And that has happened, okay? So once again, that does not prove climate change. That is consistent. I wonder what evidence those who claim this is mainly a natural phenomenon have. Well, the Dome Father is actually one of the best advocates, I would say, for the natural phenomena, but he's not here at the moment. But he's got some good arguments from his side. All right, now what I'm going to show you is the daily minimum temperatures from 1951 until 2010. Okay. So 1951, 1980, 1981, 2010. There has been a shift. And the shift is only about 0.02 of a degree. Okay. And if you look down here, right, this has been the temperature anomalies, right? The temperature anomalies have also slightly increased. So what we've seen, now once again, you can say that the margin of error is too high. Okay. So what we've done now And I didn't waste my time with the propaganda cartoons this time. I skipped that crap. But what we've seen is that we've seen sea levels rise from 1700, supposedly, if the data is correct, from 1700 until 2010, it has risen by 0.3 of a meter. Okay, and 1 meter is like, what's that? I don't even know, in feet, right? So what's that? That's 30, 60, 90, so 3.3 feet or something like that, right? So 0.3 of that, so about 1 foot, supposedly, yeah, about 1 foot, all right? 100 centimeters, yeah, 0.3 of that, 30 centimeters, 1 foot, yeah, you're right. All right, so we've seen sea level rise in 310 years of 1 foot, assuming the margin of error is low, okay? Assuming. Okay, the next thing we've seen is that extreme temperatures, cold and hot, have both increased, and the average temperature has also increased. We've also seen that temperature anomalies, the probability of a temperature anomaly has increased as well. So all of these have happened together. Now, once again, that does not prove anything. What it does suggest, though, is that something is going on. Whether it's us, whether it's something else, I'm not here to say that. There is no evidence so far from what I brought up in these lectures to suggest that it's us or that it's something else, right? Or except for the increase in carbon dioxide. But once again, that can be explained as it was in the last lecture. Okay, the sea height anomalies in the Gulf of Mexico, right, have increased by 80 centimeters, which is 2 feet roughly, 2.5 feet. Okay, there's some other projections, and I don't like to look at projections because they're mostly wrong and they're based on nothing. Okay, so now let's have a look. Impacts. Okay, so now that's talking about, now it's fear-mongering. So it's like what can happen, extinction, migration, evolution. Okay, climate change winners. The main piece of evidence is the Industrial Revolution corresponding with temp change. Yeah, but once again, I would say that's not evidence for climate change. I would say it's consistent with the climate change hypothesis. But yeah, I think we agree on that, yeah. I can't believe that Google sacked the guy from who wrote that memo on diversity. There's a new article from Jordan Peterson on that. I'm going to have a look at it. Okay. Climate change will impact on all attempts to conserve or restore biodiversity. That's fine. Orana daily max temperature change. Okay, here we go. So CWN Orana, which is somewhere in Australia. Okay, there's a slight temperature change. Okay, that's fine. Okay, more propaganda. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to skip the propaganda. Potential adaptation options for a hotter, drier climate. See, what they're doing here is called thinking past the sale. They're convincing you that they're so confident that it exists that what you have to do, which I'm not interested in. That is not scientific. Issues for future farm planning. Changing grape harvest dates. All right, here's interesting. Here's more data. Here is more data. Turn Doma's back. So here is more data that is consistent with something going on, as we said. We have here that from 1780, from 1780 until 2005, grapes are harvesting earlier and earlier, right? So they used to harvest in the late spring. Now they harvest in the early spring. Now, once again, that is not evidence of climate change. That is evidence consistent with climate change or something else, okay? So we have a look here. In 1780, okay? And this is Germany, Switzerland, and France, okay? So Germany, Switzerland, and France. Now, what's interesting is that Germany and France have both declined. Switzerland sort of went up and then dropped. Grapes are evolving. It could easily be, yes. It could be grapes are evolving from pesticides. It could be that, the way people are eating them, the demand has changed. So all of that could be true, absolutely, right? So all the evidence I've suggested, each and every single one could be explained by something not climate change related, absolutely. All I'm saying is that all of that is also consistent with the climate change hypothesis. That does not mean that climate change is correct, absolutely. Okay, now we look at Australia. In Australia, in central Victoria, Rutherglen, Mornington Peninsula, all the same. The harvests all maturing earlier. But what's interesting is that in the Margaret River, they're not. Hasn't changed at all. Actually, have a look at this. See, and this would be, you can see that it's all going, they're all maturing earlier and earlier and earlier, except for here. Here it's the same at the Margaret River. It would be interesting to know why that's the case. All right, more propaganda. All right, here we go. And 2000 and 2100. No, again, I'm not into projections because projections are all skeptical, like it's all hearsay, speculation. Now cows in the migrant river. It could be. Could be. What's needed? And see, that's the problem. The problem is that there are explanations other than climate change for all of these situations. So far from are sunspots a main factor? No, actually, that's a good point. That was brought up in the last lecture. They said that we brought this up in the last lecture exactly. They said sunspots, the irradiation from sunspots result in less than 1% of the variance in rays hitting the Earth. Okay. But what Miss Karsha said was really good. Climate change or no climate change, we would all like to have clean air and clean water. So if we can move to renewables, great. So, okay. All right, here is a bit of trigger warning coming up. This is one of the I'm not a skeptic, just a critical thinker hating fuzzy words in science. Yeah, I absolutely am with you on that. Agree 100% on that. Barriers to Australian mitigation efforts. Public denial. This is what they've written. Public denial. Barriers to Australian mitigation efforts. Public denial. Maybe it's your arrogance, you stupid idiots. Close links between economics, prosperity, lifestyle, and emissions. Relatively small absolute emissions compared to US, China, India. Patriots United. Long time no see, brother. Welcome back. Okay. Are there opportunities for the rural sector? National greenhouse gas inventory trend. All right, this one's good. So, waste has not increased. Agriculture has not increased. Industrial processes have not increased. Energy has increased. And this is in gigagrams. So from 1990, we've gone from 280,000 gigagrams of greenhouse gas to 375,000. So 100,000 gigagram increase. Once again, that proves nothing, right? It's just data at the moment. So there it is there. Oh, I spoke about all of the legitimate arguments against climate change in the lecture before. So what is it? That's exactly right. It was done by the National Inventory Carbon Dioxide Equivalent Emissions for Australia, Department of the Environment. But you are exactly right. The margin of error could be huge. The data samples could be inaccurate. Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. I don't take that stuff as gospel. Now, if you look at the agricultural emissions, it's been neutral. Okay, we've already said that, and that's it. So that's it. So those are our two lectures on climate change. The first one, as we said, we went through all of the legitimate, valid arguments from both sides. Double blind doesn't exist in government-funded science. Also true. Also true. So there are absolutely legitimate arguments, right, from no null hypothesis. Also exactly true. Yes, there is no null hypothesis. So all at best, to be legitimate, the best thing to say is that all of the data together is consistent with climate change. It does not mean that that proves climate change. It just means it's consistent with it, but it's also consistent with other things that you guys have brought up. That's exactly right. And that's the end. Models all the way down. Well, I talk about models earlier in this lecture where I said models are not a good, good argument for science at all. Models for the future, legitimate argument from legitimate sources and finders. Well, that's it. That is our both of our lectures. If you have a listen to the first one is really good to build up all of the reasons that the evidence could be flawed, and then this one here is more of the evidence that is consistent with it. So part one is a better one in the sense that it brings up all of the best arguments against climate change, which I thought were really good. A lot of them are very, very good, very legitimate. Even though my bias is for climate change, you have to acknowledge that their arguments are very good. So you look at that, and then you come look at this one, and then you decide. Dome Father may do one on his scope, and he's quite brilliant. So it'd be good to hear his version as well. All right, Gabversity, get gabbed, where facts don't care about your feelings. I am going to listen to the Jordan B. Peterson video on James Damori and the Google memo on diversity. Well, this is the problem. The problem is that a lot of people on my side, on the climate change side, really seem to be corrupt mother effers, right? It just comes across that way, right? And so it makes it worse. Anyway, if you want, I wrote an open letter to the university criticizing them on their bias, and rest is modeled feedbacks is less than 2 degrees. This is also true. Yeah, all of that is true. 100%. That's true. So if you want, go to the Google Manifesto was designed for rattle the fake left. Well, it worked, huh? If you go to Facebook.com/GavSmack, you'll see my open letter that I wrote to the uni. Fingers crossed I don't fail the course, because I gave it to them a bit. Even though I'm on the side of climate change, I gave it to them for their biased, indoctrination instead of open discourse. All right. Facts don't care about your feelings. Gabversity. Get gabbed.